My parents gave my room to my brother, claiming he needed more space, and forced me to live in the garage. Years later, when they lost their home to a disaster and came to me for help, I calmly reminded them that the garage was still available. Suddenly, it didn't seem like such a good option anymore. Growing up, I was always the one in the shadows, the forgotten son, left to shiver in the cold garage while my brother basked in the warmth of our parents' love. I learned to survive, to make something out of nothing. But just when I thought I had moved past the chill of my childhood, the past came knocking with a storm that threatened to unravel everything. As I stood in the ruins of what was once my family's home, a single thought consumed me. Could this be the moment to finally bridge the gap? To find my missing brother and perhaps, in the process, find myself? My name is Jake, and I'm 26 years old. Growing up, my family life was anything but ordinary. My parents, Robert and Susan, had 2 children, but from the very beginning it was clear that my brother Daniel was the golden child. Daniel was always described as special, which, in our household, translated to him being the center of attention, the apple of our parents' eyes. He had 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, decked out with the latest gadgets and plush furnishings, and another for his hobbies, filled with every toy and game a kid could dream of. Meanwhile, I was relegated to the garage. Not just any garage, but one with no heating, no insulation, and a door that didn't quite close right, letting in the cold and the occasional critter. I remember the nights, lying there, hearing the wind whistle through the cracks, feeling the chill seep into my bones. As I grew up, the disparity only widened. Daniel was showered with praise, his achievements celebrated with lavish parties, his failures met with gentle encouragement. I, on the other hand, was left to navigate life's challenges on my own. My parents' attention was a scarce commodity, reserved for Daniel's latest triumph or tantrum. Despite the cold, both literal and metaphorical, I found ways to keep warm. I learned to layer up, to insulate my life with small comforts. I worked odd jobs from a young age, saving every penny, dreaming of a life where I wasn't just an afterthought. By the time I turned 18, I had enough to move out. I found a small, cozy apartment in the city, a place I could call my own. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No more garage, no more feeling like a guest in my own home. I carved out a life for myself, one where I wasn't defined by my brother's shadow. But life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? Just when I thought I had escaped the cold, the past came knocking. One evening, as I was settling into my new life, a knock at my door brought back the chill. It was Daniel standing there, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite place. He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, perhaps forgiveness, or understanding, or maybe just a place to hide from whatever storm he had stirred up this time. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how far I ran, how much I achieved, the dynamics of our family, the preferential treatment, the cold garage, it all lingered, like a ghost in the machine of my life. What did he want? Why now? The answers to these questions would unravel the fabric of the life I had so carefully stitched together. Years passed, and I had built a life independent of my family's shadow. I had a stable job, a few good friends, and a sense of peace that I never knew growing up. However, one stormy evening, my phone rang with a call from my mother, Susan. Her voice was frantic, and through the static of the storm, I could barely make out her words. "Jake, the hurricane, our house, it's gone." I felt a mix of shock and a strange sense of inevitability. After all, the house was old and the area was prone to such weather events. I agreed to meet them, not knowing what to expect. The drive to my childhood home was a blur of rain and wind, the wipers struggling to keep up with the torrential downpour. Each mile felt like a step back in time, pulling me into memories I had worked so hard to leave behind. The closer I got, the more the storm seemed to echo the turmoil inside me. When I finally arrived, the scene was one of devastation. The house, or what was left of it, stood like a skeleton against the dark, stormy sky. The roof was torn away, walls collapsed, and debris scattered everywhere. My mother stood there, her clothes soaked, her face streaked with tears and mud. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and despair. "Jake, thank God you're here," she said, her voice breaking. "Your father. He's at the hospital. He was trying to secure the house when it all came down." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. My mother's eyes were wide, filled with a fear I had never seen before. "And Daniel," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "he's missing. We haven't seen him since the storm hit." The news hit me like a physical blow. Daniel, despite everything, was still my brother. The thought of him out there, alone in this chaos, brought back a rush of protective instincts I thought I had buried. I looked around at the wreckage, the remnants of a life that had once been so clear-cut in its favoritism. Now it was all reduced to rubble, just like the barriers I had built around my heart. "I'll find him," I said, more to myself than to her. "I'll find Daniel." The search began immediately. I called out his name, my voice lost in the howling wind. Flashlight in hand, I navigated through the debris, my heart pounding with every step. The storm had not only destroyed our home, but had also stripped away the layers of resentment and neglect that had defined my relationship with my family. As I searched, memories flashed before my eyes. Daniel's laughter, our rare moments of camaraderie, overshadowed by the constant reminder of his favored status. But now, all that mattered was finding him, ensuring he was safe. The rain continued to pour, the wind relentless, but I pressed on, driven by a newfound urgency. What was once a place of neglect and cold now stood as a beacon of hope amidst the destruction. The sight was devastating. The house was reduced to rubble, with only the garage standing, a cruel irony. My parents, looking defeated and soaked, stood amidst the debris. They turned to me, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. "Jake, we have nowhere to go," my father, Robert, said, his voice breaking. I looked around, the garage still standing, untouched by the storm. "It's still available," I said, pointing to it. The shock on their faces was palpable. They had never considered that I might offer them the same conditions they had given me, but what they didn't know was that the garage held more than just memories. Over the years, I had transformed it. What was once a cold, uninviting space had become my sanctuary. I had insulated the walls, installed heating, and even added a small window to let in light. It was no longer the place of my childhood nightmares, but a testament to my resilience and independence. "Jake, you did this?" my mother asked, her voice a mix of surprise and something akin to pride. "Yes," I replied, feeling a surge of mixed emotions. "I made it livable, warm. It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, offering them refuge in the very place they had once deemed good enough for me. My father's eyes, usually stern, softened as he looked at the garage, perhaps seeing it for the first time as I had seen it all those years. "We can't impose on you like this," he started, but I cut him off. "You're not imposing. This is family, isn't it?" The words felt strange on my tongue, but they were true. Despite everything, they were still my family, and in this moment of crisis, old wounds seemed less important than the immediate need for shelter. As we moved towards the garage, I felt a pang of the old resentment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that life had come full circle. The garage, once a symbol of my exclusion, now stood as a symbol of my capacity to forgive, to provide, and to rebuild. Inside, I showed them the space. It was modest but warm, with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a space heater. "It's not what you're used to," I said, "but it's safe and it's dry." My mother sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. "Jake, we never realized how much you had to endure. We're sorry." I nodded, accepting her apology, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness, I realized, was not just for them. It was for me to move on. The night grew darker, the storm outside unrelenting. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the patter of rain against the new window I had installed. Then, my father spoke, his voice low. "We've always been So focused on Daniel, on his needs, his wants. We never saw you, Jake. Not really. I looked at him, seeing the regret etched in his features. It's okay, Dad. We're here now, together. That's what matters. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, memories of better times, avoiding the elephant in the room, my missing brother. But as the night wore on, the weight of Daniel's absence grew heavier. I'm going back out to look for him, I announced, standing up. The urgency to find him hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. Be careful, Jake, my mother pleaded, her eyes filled with a mother's worry. I will, I assured her, grabbing my coat and flashlight. As I stepped out into the storm again, the cold wind hit me. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't just searching for my brother. I was searching for closure, for a chance to reconcile the past with the present. The garage, now a refuge, for my parents, was a testament to my journey from neglect to self-sufficiency. As they hesitantly moved toward the garage, I could see the realization dawning on them. This was not just about shelter. It was about understanding the life I had lived. Inside, the garage was now insulated, heated, and furnished with a small bed, a desk, and even some of my old belongings. It was a stark contrast to what it had been. My parents looked around, their expressions a mix of confusion and guilt. You made this livable? Susan asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied. I did what you never did for me. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that speaks volumes without a single word. My father, Robert, walked over to the desk, his fingers tracing the edges of the wood, perhaps remembering the times he had walked past this very space without a second thought. I remember when you used to sleep here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were okay with it. I watched him, the man who had always seemed so distant, now grappling with the reality of his oversight. I wasn't okay with it, Dad, but I learned to survive, to make something out of nothing. Susan sat on the bed, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the small comforts I had managed to gather. Jake, we didn't know. We were so caught up in Daniel's world, we forgot to look at yours. Her words stung, yet they also carried a weight of truth that I had long acknowledged. It's all right, Mom. I've made peace with it. But now, we need to focus on finding Daniel. The storm outside was relentless, the wind howling like a chorus of regret. I could see the fear in their eyes, not just for Daniel, but for the years they had missed, the son they had overlooked. I'll go out again, I said, breaking the silence. I need to find him. Robert nodded, his face etched with lines of worry. Be careful, son. This storm, it's unlike any we've seen. As I prepared to leave, Susan stood up, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. Jake, before you go, I want you to know, we're proud of you, for everything you've become, despite us. Her words, so simple yet so profound, filled the room with a warmth that no heater could match. I felt a lump in my throat, the kind that comes with the realization that forgiveness might be possible, that healing could start here, in this very garage. I'll be back, I promised, stepping out into the storm. The cold wind hit me, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about finding Daniel, it was about finding myself, about reconciling the past with the present. The garage, now a refuge for my parents, was a testament to my journey from neglect to self-sufficiency. As I walked away, the light from the small window I had installed cast a glow on the path ahead, a beacon in the darkness, guiding me not just through the storm, but through the tangled emotions of our family's history. Cliffhanger. But the real shock was yet to come. I led them to a corner of the garage where a large locked chest sat. This, I said, unlocking it, is what I've been working on. Inside were documents, photos, and a detailed account of my life, detailing the neglect, the cold nights, the loneliness. I've been documenting everything, not for revenge, but for understanding. You need to see what you've missed. The room fell silent as they sifted through the contents. Tears streamed down Susan's face as she read through my childhood diary entries. The medical bills I had to pay myself, the letters I wrote to them that were never answered. Robert picked up a stack of old photographs, his hands trembling. They were pictures of me, alone in the garage, wrapped in blankets, trying to stay warm. His eyes met mine, a storm of emotions swirling within them. "Jake, I had no idea," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. Susan's sobs grew louder as she came across a letter I had written when I was just 10, asking for a warm blanket for my birthday. The realization hit her like a wave, the understanding of how much I had suffered, how much I had been ignored. "I thought you were okay with it," Robert said again, his voice breaking. "I thought you were strong, that you didn't need us." I watched. Them, the weight of their guilt palpable in the air. "I wasn't okay with it, Dad, but I learned to survive." "To make something out of nothing," I repeated, the words now carrying a different weight, a testament to my resilience. Susan reached out, her hand shaking as she touched the pages of my diary. "Jake, we were so caught up in Daniel's world, we forgot to look at yours. We're so sorry." I nodded, accepting their apologies, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness, I realized, was not just for them. It was for me to move on. The storm outside raged on, but inside the garage, a different kind of storm was brewing. Years of neglect, of being overlooked, were being confronted. The documents, the photos, they were not just evidence of my past. They were the keys to unlocking the truth, to understanding the depth of my isolation. "I kept all this," I explained, "because I needed to remember, not to hold on to anger, but to understand why I am who I am, and maybe to help you understand too." Robert sat down heavily on the bed, his face buried in his hands. "We failed you, Jake. We failed you as parents." Susan moved closer to him, her hand on his back, her own face a mask of sorrow. "We can't change the past, but we can try to make amends now. We can start by finding Daniel." The mention of Daniel brought a new tension to the room. The urgency. To find him was a shared burden now, a mission that transcended our past grievances. "I'm going back out to look for him," I announced, standing up. The urgency to find him hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger with the revelations of the night. "Be careful, Jake," Susan pleaded, her eyes filled with a mother's worry, now extended to both her sons. "I will," I assured her, grabbing my coat and flashlight. As I stepped out into the storm again, the cold wind hit me. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't just searching for my brother. I was searching for closure, for a chance to reconcile the past with the present. Efficiency. The light from the small window I had installed cast a glow on the path ahead, a beacon in the darkness, guiding me not just through the storm, but through the tangled emotions of our family's history. Cliffhanger. But the real shock was yet to come. After a long silence, Robert spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "Jake, we didn't know. We thought we were doing what was best for Daniel, but we failed you." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I know. And now, you can stay. Here, in the garage, not as punishment, but as a chance for us to start anew, to understand each other better." They agreed, and over the next few weeks, we began to rebuild, not just the house, but our relationships. Daniel, who had been away at college, came back, and together we all worked to mend the past. The garage, once a symbol of neglect, became the foundation of our family's rebirth. It was there, amidst the tools and the remnants of my childhood, that we found common ground. Robert, with his hands now calloused from manual labor, learned to appreciate the resilience I had built within those cold walls. Susan, her eyes often red from tears of regret, began to see the strength in my solitude. Daniel, too, was different. The storm had shaken him, and he returned with a humility that was new to him. He looked at the garage, not with the disdain of his youth, but with a newfound respect. "I never knew, Jake," he said one evening, his voice soft, almost lost in the hum of the heater I had installed. "I never knew how you lived here." I watched him, the brother I had both envied and loved, as he sifted through the old photos and documents I had kept. "It's okay, Daniel. You're here now, helping to rebuild. That's what matters." As we worked, the physical labor of rebuilding the house paralleled our efforts to rebuild our bonds. Robert, who had always been distant, now shared stories of his own childhood, revealing vulnerabilities I had never seen before. Susan cooked meals in the small kitchenette, each dish a silent apology, a gesture of love that had been missing for so long. One evening, as we sat around a makeshift table, the storm outside had calmed, but the storm within was still brewing. "Jake," Susan began, her voice trembling, "we've missed so much. We want to make it right, if you'll let us." I looked at them, my family, flawed and human. "It's not about making it right, Mom. It's about moving forward, together." Daniel nodded, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity I hadn't seen since we were kids. "I want to be part of this, Jake. I want to understand, to help." The days turned into weeks, and with each nail hammered, each wall painted, we were not just reconstructing a home, but reconstructing our family. The garage, once a place of isolation, had become our communal space, a testament to our collective journey towards understanding and forgiveness. But the biggest surprise was yet to unfold. One day, while sorting through old boxes, I found a letter I had written to myself as a child, a promise to never forget the cold, to use it as fuel for my future. I read it aloud, my voice steady but my heart racing. "This," I said, holding up, "the letter is what I've been working on. Not just the house, but this. Understanding why I am who I am, and maybe to help you understand too." The room fell silent as they listened. Robert's eyes, usually stern, softened. "Jake, we've seen what we've missed. We're here now, ready to make amends, to be the family you deserved." Susan reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the letter. "We're so sorry, Jake. We'll never let you feel alone again." As the sun set, casting long shadows through the small window, we sat together, the storm outside a distant memory. Inside, a different kind of storm had passed, leaving behind a foundation stronger than any we had known. The garage, once a symbol of neglect, had become the very heart of our family's rebirth. And as we looked at each other, the past seemed less like a burden and more like the ground from which we could all grow anew. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.